despite having all of this coming in at you, despite struggling with emotional eating, despite having relationship issues, despite hating my body, even despite all of these things, whatever it is for you, in this moment, right now, I'm safe. And it's okay for me to just have a pause and connect with that. And it allows the body to release that tension. So just in the moment only, right, you can have that moment of peace for yourself.
I'm your host, Kim Hines, and welcome to the Emotional Eats podcast. I'm on a mission to show you that what you consume, not just the food, affects your entire life. Midlife is different. Let's dig into the real reasons why you eat when you're not hungry and why you're not feeling well. My guests and I are going to give you doable solutions and help you let go of perfectionism, food rules, and stress to make changes that will last a lifetime. If you're ready to ditch old school diet culture and nourish your entire life, this is the show for you. So many people are dealing with stress these days. Maybe you're also dealing with some negative feelings, emotional eating, body image issues, issues in your relationships, or things from the past. If you're feeling any of these and you're trying to release it, but you're not sure how, you are going to learn one of my favorite techniques to find peace in this episode. I'm so honored to have Jason Winters on the show. He is a heart-centered coach, and he has helped so many coaches like me transform not only my personal journey, but how I help clients even better. The method that Jason teaches is called EFT Tapping. If you've already been a client of mine, then you know how much I love tapping to help release the stress and negative thoughts so that you can really move forward. Stay tuned in this episode so you can find out more about the EFT tapping method and what it can do for you to help you get out of that loop, change your brain to create a peaceful space to work on anything you're dealing with in your life. Check out the show notes for all the places to find Jason, but you can start with his website, tapwithjason.com. It's a great way to nourish your entire life and give yourself grace today. Enjoy the episode. Hi, Jason. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, Kim. Thanks for inviting me. I feel honored.
I'm so happy to have you here because not only have you been my coach, my mentor, and my friend, but you brought tapping into my world for not only me, but my clients. And now we get to talk about it with the listeners today. So I would love to hear from you before we even get into what tapping is. What was your background? What was your story? How did you evolve into helping people as a coach? And also, how did you evolve from there to teaching the tapping?
Yeah, well, I'll give you the Cliff Notes version, the shortened version, because we all have like this, the longer we live, this long life story, right? I'll start with health coaching school. So I went through IIN and I finished that program around 2014. And that program opened my eyes to the reality of what was in the way for me just in life in general. A lot of the emotional eating, the binge eating, all of that came to light as emotional. And my entire life, I thought it was eat less, eat different foods and all about gut health and so forth and so forth. So once my eyes were open to this concept, this idea that, oh, this is an emotional response, this is emotional eating, I did feel like, well, now what? And somehow tapping came in. I can't even tell you, how Google knows that we're, into this world of different things. And I was introduced to it. And I went to an in-person weekend training with EFT Universe. And that's where I started like really learning tapping. And it just blew my mind. It was amazing. So I was health coaching, and then I went from health coaching to doing some business coaching and integrating tapping, all the way through it. And I just can't help but add that what tapping did for me was linked back to like early childhood events that were connected to the emotional eating. And so I was able to go back and kind of clear that trauma. And then once I experienced all of this work, then I just had to help my clients with it as well. And they just started like taking leaps and bounds forward when I integrated tapping.
That's great. And I appreciate that you brought up the link to the past and knowing that diets and restricting your food was not necessarily the answer,
Mm-mm.
that it's so much deeper when we eat out of emotions. And I appreciate that you made that point. And I'll share with you, I was doing tapping before I saw what you were doing, and it's brought me to an even deeper level. I was doing it, but not necessarily with myself. So
Mm.
that is where things changed for me. And when you talked about doing it for yourself, I went backwards. I went clients to me and you went you to clients.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. What I'd love to have the listeners hear from you, and it's one of these things when we explain tapping and we're doing it, not showing it, it's interesting. So I encourage people to look it up after you listen to the podcast if you've never seen it before. But can you explain the best way that you can what EFT is? And when I say that physically, they don't need to really see what it is to understand the benefits of it. But there are certain places that we tap, and there's certain reasons why we do it. And you can decide. We don't have to get into the scientific part, but really getting into what it is and why it works.
Yeah. Before I explain that, I love the part where you said you don't have to get into the science of it all, because some people really nerd out on the science. Like my partner in business, she nerds out on all the science and she loves that. I like the science as well, not as much as she does. But the reason that it's important that we practice this and experience it, because it is experiential, is because our emotions, EFT stands for emotional freedom technique. And when we're feeling something emotional, it's very rare that we almost never actually think about the science behind our emotions, right? So it kind of makes sense that if we're using a tool or a technique that's going to support us around that, to use it, to experience it, you don't need the science, but to understand it, yeah, absolutely, you can do that. And so in the moment when we need relief, when we want relief, when we're feeling stress, anxious, overwhelmed, this is a technique that you can just pick up and use. It's free, and it I have a video on YouTube that teaches you how to do it, why it works, and how to do it for anxiety and other emotions. But simply, Kim, what you're doing is you're tapping on their 9 basic meridian endpoints. So if you think of like a junction, people who are familiar with acupuncture know that along the meridian pathways, there are points where the acupuncturist will stick the needle. And that will release the tension. It will allow the energy to flow, because when you have stuck energy, right, when there's stagnant energy from grief or feeling stress, you're drawn inward, it's tight. But when you notice someone who's happy, who is joyful, who's running, they're open, it's freer, their arms are open, their body is open. And so we are living in a world where constantly we're being bombarded with things that close us up because we are needing to protect ourselves from the things that are coming in. And so tapping is very simple, that it communicates with the nervous system, the part of the brain, the amygdala, and says, despite having all of this coming in at you, despite struggling with emotional eating, despite having relationship issues, despite hating my body, even despite all of these things, whatever it is for you, in this moment, right now, I'm safe. And it's okay for me to just have a pause and connect with that. And it allows the body to release that tension. So just in the moment only, right? You can have that moment of peace for yourself. And it's just a very powerful technique. And then going forward in the future, it releases a lot of tension and stress and changes the brain patterns that loop that we constantly get in. And so I like to help people to understand that when you're working, it's free. So people are thinking sometimes, why would I need to work with a practitioner if it's free and I can do it on myself? Well, that's the difference. This is a self-care tool, a technique that you can use. But when you're looking to make those major changes, you're going to want some support with a coach like you who can support you throughout this journey along the way. So I hope that kind of answered the question, but if you have follow-ups, I'm open to
I
that.
think that's great. And you talked about the feelings in the body and when we shift from having the feelings in the body. So when you work with people using tapping and you ask them, where are you feeling it? Where are some of the typical places that people are feeling the tension?
Yeah, a lot of times people will feel it in their stomach, heaviness in the chest, and also pain. So when you are tuned into your body, or it's not even necessarily need to tune, just kind of look back and say, what discomfort do you feel? Right. Even right now, someone's thinking, oh, yeah, my knee, I have knee pain. Or someone may be saying, like, I typically have IBS or stomach issues or things like that. That is literally your body communicating with you, saying something's not right, something's off. And there is always an emotional component to it. And I just want to pause there. There's always an emotional component to whatever we're feeling in our body. We say things like butterflies in the stomach, but there's no such thing as butterflies in the stomach, right? It's energy that's shifting. And so when that energy shows up in your body, you can actually move it, you can shift it, you can clear it with tapping by calming the nervous system.
That's wonderful. It is interesting because we do have emotional resistance in our bodies and we hold the emotions, we hold trauma, we hold everything in our bodies. So to be able to make that shift is amazing. When you're working with someone, even if you're doing, a simple tapping to reduce stress, what do you see as you're going through? What do you see in the shift from beginning to end so that you know? Because sometimes I know that people don't always think they've even had the shift, but what do you see when people have had a shift from that emotion?
Yeah, my Kim, such a brilliant question. And there's so many things that you can see, but one thing that comes to mind, just piggybacking off of what you just said, when we hold on to emotions, there's a reason that we're holding on to it. And so it can be tough and challenging and think of it this way, but there's a benefit for us holding on to emotions that may not serve us in the best way. So if I'm working with a client and they're constantly in a loop of some sort, like emotional eating, for instance, and they're in this loop and they're like, I just keep doing it over and over again. Instead of judging that thing, we can find out what is the benefit of that for them. Um, and once they identify how this is supporting them, whether it's helping them to not have to address something that feels frightening for them, they have that moment when they are like, oh my goodness, I never realized that. Or they will come up with something like, okay, so maybe instead of this, I can do that. So I'm not telling the client what they should or shouldn't do. They're having literally a cognitive shift. And it sounds very simple, but when you see it happen, it's amazing. Someone will go from a feeling of fear and fright and feeling like they'll never get through this, they'll never get over it, to literally, it's like a switch gets flipped and they're in positive mode. Like, okay, I really feel like I can do this from my core. I can make this adjustment. I can make this change. So that's one. One other one that I'll tell you is clients will have pain or discomfort in their body that is measurable. Like if you say on a 0 to 10 scale, they will tell me that they have this pain at a 9. and it is a nagging pain in some part of their body or a headache or something. And after just a round or two, sometimes maybe 3 rounds of tapping, which can be done in less than 5 minutes, the pain, if it's not gone, it is significantly reduced to like a 3. And so that's also a shift in the body where they are feeling differently. The first one, I believe it's more of perspective shifting, and either one of those and all of the other ways too. It's just amazing when in moments you see somebody's body shifting.
I love that. And I
Yeah.
think what's really amazing to me is it's not only seeing that shift, hearing the shift, seeing the rewiring happening, a possibility that someone never knew could
Mm-hmm.
be and how they would feel or feel about themselves. But as a numbers girl, I love using the scale because it's a tangible for
Yeah.
me to hear how someone's moving from one place to another. So that's great. And you brought up emotional eating, which makes me think about diet culture and limiting beliefs from our childhood and how we feel about ourselves and what we're capable of doing. How can tapping help us with those limiting beliefs of, I'm never going to lose weight, I am going to be stuck like this forever, I'm going to have this pain forever, whatever the story or the lie that's being told? How can we switch that with tapping?
Yeah. A lot of the things that we go through in life come with a lot of shame over years and years and years. And unveiling these dark spaces, whether it's shame or trauma of another kind, we need safety. We need safety. It's why people are really focused on making more money, why people want better relationships, why people want to be healthier. It's because all of these things are gateways, or they help us to see into a safer space, right? So a healthier body, you feel more safe, like you won't be sick and eventually die, right? I mean, we all eventually will die in this system, but the idea of I want to be as safe as possible, as healthy as possible. Money represents safety, secure relationships, right? Safety, security, and things like that. So when a person is dealing with emotional eating, their safety has been challenged. When we are tapping on the different parts of the body, what it does is it creates an environment within our system, our nervous system, that literally communicates to the brain that you're safe, that things are okay, right? In this moment, you're safe. And so there are many layers to emotional eating, right? And so when you have these layers, for instance, emotional eating versus cravings, right? I'm eating this particular food because I'm craving this food, right? That means I'm going to go to the ends of the earth to get this donut or whatever, and I've been there, right? I'm craving this particular food, whereas like binge eating or emotional eating of this sort is more like it doesn't really matter what food it is. I just need to have that satisfaction. I need to get as much of this food in as possible. And everybody in that, even those within cravings, there's a spectrum. Within the emotional eating side of things, there's a spectrum. And so just coming to understand these things, it can be very overwhelming. It can be taxing on the brain and body, and it can make us feel hopeless, like there's just so much there. And when we're tapping, and it can be, coupled with breath work, meditation, other practices, you're bringing your nervous system down. That's what we need. We don't need to avoid um, these issues. We actually need to see them, but we need to see them in a way that does not make us feel unsafe. We need to feel safe to even be able to go into those spaces. And so, like I mentioned, as we're tapping these meridian endpoints, we're sending that signal to the brain saying, oh, you know what? Even though this is happening, I'm safe. It's okay to look here. It's okay to be with it. And then from there on, I'm more resourceful. I'm accepting. I'm able.
I think the word accepting is really important. And I'm so glad you brought that word up because when we're tapping, I notice that even with myself, the acceptance, being grounded, being present, being okay, who I am. So I appreciate that you brought that up. And when we're talking about helping ourselves with, for example, the binge eating, emotional eating, do you feel like tapping is something that is only useful when we're not in that situation? Or have you been able to help people or heard of people being able to do it when they are about to go down that road? Because there's a couple things going on here. One, getting caught up in it and then maybe using it because of the shame and guilt and feeling okay and acceptance. And then the other side of it is there a way to help prevent having those moments?
Yeah. So I think I'm understanding your question. Here's what was true for me and so many people who I've worked with emotional eating. Um, to me, it's a fact that emotional eating is not something that comes up, right? So it's not a thing, like we don't go looking for it and it doesn't just come up for us, even though it feels that way. Like I'm just driving down the street and all of a sudden I see a store and I'm tempted to go into that store and eat, even though I'm not hungry, right? Where that actually starts is a deeper hunger, a deeper desire, a deeper need that has not been met. And it's always going to be better for you to address that in a calmer state. So right now, the store isn't there, right? But what is there right now, right? Some vision work will then help you to see when I go by this store, what am I feeling in my body? Right? I just feel out of control. I feel like mouth watering, this out of control feeling. I'm just thinking back to how I felt. Um, if I'm on my way and I'm going to be late, it doesn't matter. Like nothing matters. I just need to get this fix, so to speak. That's going to communicate to you like I feel out of control, right? And then that feeling of out of control may communicate to you as you're tapping. It takes the layers of the onions away, that maybe there's some areas in my life where I feel like I need control, or areas of my life where I feel like I don't have control, but this is the one area that I can control, or so forth like that. um with with the binge eating, with the emotional eating, with those things, it is not easy to regulate when you're in the moment, because your brain is already, on a path. And even if you do say not stop yourself, right? If you're able to stop yourself, what has happened, Kim, is you've put so much energy, so much even more shame, like you shouldn't be doing this. These are the stories like stop, don't do it. And the brain doesn't work well when we're telling it to not. It doesn't work well in the knots. The brain wants to it doesn't want to lose weight, right? That's not safe for the body. The brain doesn't want to not do things. The brain wants to do things. So deleting things from the brain is like impossible, but adding things in is possible. And so that's what we're doing when we're like resisting like this food, like, no, I'm not going to do it. I won't do it. But you're actually bringing more attention to the thing. And so when we're not in those moments, that's when it's really important to do this deeper work of understanding um, what's going on. Like, what really is at the root of this?
What are you really hungry for? And the negativity that you talked about when we cannot handle, our brain cannot handle the negative side of that. We need to really hear the positive. And we find that, but we don't seem to believe it with diet culture. We believe that cutting down our portions, having a strict diet, we don't seem to believe in our world. We just are inundated with this message that that's how we can do it. But in actuality, like you said, our brain doesn't do well with that, the taking away, it's adding in. And I really appreciate the talk that tapping uses, because when we go through tapping, and this is something we can dig a little deeper in with the listeners, you will want to discover tapping to understand this fully. But when we start, it's really talking about what is. It's so accepting. So if I'm stressed out, I'm able to say, I'm stressed. If I am ready to eat, I'm going to say, yeah, I really want to eat that. I really want that. Or I think I want that. Whatever the as is, but we eventually get to, it reminds me of positive self-talk of when we get to that acceptance part. So do you see a link between that, between when you talk about the positive versus the negative, how we speak to ourselves and what our body hears? Do you see how tapping helps with that? And can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah. So when we're tapping, a lot of people will say that we tap on the negative, but exactly what you said, it's really about our truth. So our truth, we may perceive it as negative. The emotions that we're experiencing, one may perceive it as negative, but it really is just your truth. There's no such thing as negative or positive emotions, literally, right? We use the term negative emotions, but sadness is an emotion that we experience and everyone experiences it. I think what makes it bad or negative is the resistance to it. But if we lean in and see, like, I'm feeling sad, what am I feeling sad about? Now I get to address and honor myself and honor the sadness, because it's okay for me to feel sadness, but the more I resist feeling into those emotions and feeling the sadness, the more it's going to persist and it actually overwhelms and takes over. And so when we're using the tapping, it's not it's not bringing in negativity to us, as some people think. It's honoring the truth about how we really feel. And if you think about an analogy of cleaning your home, if you have a home that hasn't been dusted in 2 months, let's just say you were busy, right? Um, the truth is that there's dust on the furniture, on anything that, that has levels, right? There's dust there. If you were to say that the dust is negative, right? Or, it's not negative, it's not positive, it's dust. It's there. And so the reality is I see the dust. Now I can take my cloth and I can clean the dust. And now it shines, whatever it is, it's shining. And so if we think about ourselves, like, the reality is there's anger because of whatever childhood stuff that happened, or there's sadness, or there's grief, or whatever it is. Acknowledging the truth of it, tapping, accepting that truth. Now my beautiful qualities can shine because they're not fighting with grief and sadness and anger. Now I get to experience all these different emotions in a balanced way, so that when I'm sad, and I can communicate that to my partner and say, today I'm feeling really sad. You know, you don't, it's nothing to worry about. I'm just processing some things. And then tomorrow you can be joyful, and or it doesn't even have to be tomorrow. It can be whenever, right? Maybe you're sad for a few minutes, maybe you're sad for an hour, maybe you're sad that day. But I think that what we have not been able to do as a culture, as communities, is accept where we are. And it makes it harder to accept other people and where they are.
Oh, that's powerful. When we don't accept ourselves, it is very hard to accept others. And when we don't love ourselves, it's really hard to love other
Yeah.
people. Yes, that is very, very powerful. So I love the idea of honoring where we are, honoring those emotions and feelings. And I'm going to just repeat this, that they are not good or bad. They are. And it's really similar to what we will tell our clients. I know you feel the same way. Food is not good or bad. And you are not good or bad based on what you eat. And we put this label of good or bad on everything. But I think part of that comes from our past. I think we are, when we act a certain way or we feel something or we share something along the way, some of us have been told, and hey, that's not okay. You can't let that out. So I think that's another space for tapping, where a lot of that repressed emotion, we're allowed to let that out. And I'm curious, when we are tapping, let's say we're tapping on our own, don't know what to say, don't have any idea what's really going on, I'm just agitated, I'm irritable, I have no idea. Can you just tap to
Yeah.
tap? And what happens when you do that?
Yeah. So what the science shows is that tapping is communicating with the brain. So you're calming down the response, the response that we have to anger. Everybody has a different response, but a response to anger may be road rage. A response to sadness may be not getting things done, and that may be bothering you, right? Road rage, we know the dangers of that. So we have responses to these emotions that we don't want, right? Or they may not serve us. And so what we're doing is we're able to be in choice with our emotions, and we get to decide. And that's a very powerful place to be, is deciding as opposed to your emotions just taking over, and you feel out of choice, out of control. You're not the decision maker. The emotions are. And so that's really where um, you're communicating with your brain to calm things down so that you can be um, reasonable and make decisions that are going to support you. Even though this person cut me off, I have choices now. Am I going to honk the horn and go and cut them back off? Or am I just going to recognize that that was not the move, that was not cool, and move on with my day? Or will I allow this to just carry on throughout, go to work with this and back home with this? And it's like, you get to choose, right? You get to decide.
I choose peace. That's usually what
Yeah.
I say. I definitely choose peace. Um, so with working with people, and mostly we're having female listeners here, how do you find that tapping helps women trust themselves, trust their bodies, and trust their decisions better?
This is a good one. Um, yeah, I dealt with this a lot, Kim, and to be honest with you, trust is still a place where I'm working on trusting myself. So trusting yourself, right? Trusting other people, that's one thing, but I'll talk about trusting yourself, or trusting myself. When you distrust yourself, it is majority of the time based off of past experiences where you almost have the proof that you are not trustworthy, right? And so breaking that down, allowing your body and your brain to experience something different, something new for yourself, you're building a new pattern for yourself. And what tapping allows you to do is just to kind of be with that, and to honor the reasons that you distrust yourself, and to be and honor this new way that you're learning to navigate. So I'll give you one experience. I had a path that I would follow after work when I was working, and I would come home and every day, this store, that store, this store, that store. And it wasn't really every day. It was when I was on the binge cycle, right? Which would tend to be like I had a specific cycle. So it would either be 3 times a week, or it would be like 2 weeks in a row or 3 weeks in a row. And then I would purge, which was not, for me, it wasn't throwing up. It was more like dieting down and being super strict, which I consider that purging as well. Now, once the binging stopped and I was no longer doing that, the anxiety as I would come up to certain exits would still be there. And my coach told me, she kind of coined it as mental binging. Because even though I wasn't actually doing the binging any longer, I still had the fear, like, oh, well, what if and it almost triggered kind of going back because it was so familiar that then I needed to clear that. And that was part of the trust. Even though I wasn't doing it anymore, I didn't trust that I was able to not do it anymore. And so mentally, it was almost like I was still going down the same path, the same behaviors. I wasn't physically doing it, but in my mind, I went down that same road. So that's just one thing where trust, and part of that is habit, and part of it is trust. When you are proving to yourself that this is the new me, that I have broken through that glass ceiling and I'm doing things differently now, it can be hard to believe. It can be hard to, even if you're doing it, it can be hard because you remember, and those patterns and those grooves in the brain are very familiar, and almost the old pattern is like the comfortable pattern, right? So as you're tapping, you're just bringing yourself, you're again calming your nervous system, but also tapping in this positive way so that you're integrating what you're doing. And that's what we need to do. Like, we integrate that. It's like with my son now, he's 4, and if we don't encourage him to brush his teeth, he's not going to do that, right? He's not going to do it. But eventually, as he gets older, that should be integrated, and some things take longer to integrate than others. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, that is a great explanation. It reminds me of, for those of us who are old enough, when we have a turntable with a record on the turntable and there's a scratch on the record, and the needle just keeps going in that groove until you hop it out and do something different.
Yeah.
And that makes me think of one more question. If we can use tapping to help with that process of trusting, can we also use tapping to help us find and dig deeper into our authentic selves? Because as we get older, and I'm talking to more and more people who are, 40 and above, breaking free of old identities, learning to be ourselves, learning to speak our voice, how does tapping help in that area?
Yeah. So I think that um when we're speaking about tapping, like, tapping can literally help with anything, right? Any issue that we're having. And um it's kind of interesting. And I don't want the listeners to think of like, oh, more of how tapping can help with this or how tapping can help with that. Without the point of whatever it is that we have a goal of that we're not reaching, there's resistance to that. And that resistance is in our body. So an example could be public speaking. If I am going to speak in front of 1,000 people and I have a resistance to doing that, I'm going to feel something. There's going to be a response that I'm going to feel, right? It might be in my stomach. You might notice in the breathing where I'm panting and I can barely speak. There's something going to happen physically that's going to show up. When you think of being your authentic self, what shows up for you, right? When you think of doing this thing that you desire to do, what happens in your body? Even if it's just the thoughts that come up. Maybe it's the thought like, that's not going to happen, or whatever comes up for you. That is the gold. And when you have that piece, that's when you know, okay, this is the resistance. And then you start to tapping. So we're looking for that resistance to someone being their authentic self. Oftentimes we already know what it is. So another way that we can approach this with tapping is if a person feels like, I don't know, like this is just how I've always been, right? That's an example of something. Really, what that often means is I have not allowed myself to sit still enough to see what I really want and what authentically I want for myself. And tapping will help you get to that place where you're calming things down, you're turning all the noise down, right? All the knobs or all the dials are being turned down, and you get to finally listen to what's going on, what you really want, from your at your core, and what shows up, that really is your authentic self. And then sometimes you're like, is that really me? I don't appreciate this. I don't want this. I don't like this. Well, then that's where some of the work can begin. And that can be scary, Kim, because as you are looking inward and you see things that you don't like it's immediately the initial response is just to close the door. I don't want to look in that closet anymore. But that's where the work is. That's where the
Exactly.
work.
And sometimes you're not ready, and that's okay.
And
You
that's
can get
okay.
back to that. It's powerful. And it's hard, I think, too, for some people when they start opening those doors, we're bringing back the past a lot of times. And we're looking at where we first were told things and felt things and traumas that we've gone through. So, yes, we have to be ready, and that's okay.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Jason. Is there anything else you'd like to add about tapping before I ask the final question?
Um, no, I think you can ask it.
That's great. I appreciate sharing everything. We're probably going to have to do a part two because there's so much more to this. But I ask all of my guests when I share with the listeners that I want them to be able to nourish their entire lives, not just focus on food and exercise. I ask my guests, what are 3 tips that you would give? It can be related to tapping or not, that would help someone get started to just feel good and nourish their life.
Okay, this is a good one. All right, so then your last question I will incorporate in this one because something has come up for me. I think that simply put, um, trust that where you are in your journey, in your process, health, life, business, or otherwise, relationships, so forth. Um, just just trust that you're right where you need to be. And if you find it hard to trust that, that's okay. Because the second thing is to be very curious about where you are, who you are, no matter how old you are. Become more and more curious about the person who you're becoming. So if you're finding it hard to trust, don't force trusting. You're not broken because you don't trust yourself. But curiosity is something that you can start with. And even if you do trust yourself, curiosity is so important. And then be gentle with this process. We are um constantly doing, you know, doing the things to overcome emotional eating, doing the things to grow your business, doing the things to have a better family, doing. And we need a moment to pause and just be. And it is cliche and people are saying this, but there's very few people who are just being themselves, even for a moment. Even if you take 5 minutes just to just kind of be, relax, and just be who you are. When it comes to tapping, that is something that can really help you. Tuning in, we talked about a lot of deep work, but this does not have to be so deep all the time. Like just tapping through the points and just kind of processing, being curious. And if you don't feel comfortable to go into these heavy areas or dark areas, don't. You don't have to. Tapping can be viewed however it works for you. So I use it to just be more connected, just to be more grounded, just to connect with myself, just to say, okay, it's a lot going on. Let me just sit here for 5 minutes and just connect with myself and feel. Right. So you don't have to go into the deep work and do all of these things. We need moments with so much going on where we can just kind of relax and we can just be ourselves. So curiosity, being gentle, and just tapping. Like don't worry about all the science and this and am I doing it right or wrong? Just get started.
That's powerful. And I really appreciate you sharing to just be. We're in a very busy, very task oriented to do list world. And sometimes we really do. We need to put the phone away and just be and tap. So thank you. So I love sharing you with everyone because you've been an amazing coach and mentor and friend, as I mentioned. How can people find you?
You can find videos about tapping at Tap with Jason on YouTube, and I'm at Tap with Jason on Instagram and my website, tapwithjason.com. So those are 3 areas.
That's great. I'll be putting all of those in the show notes also, so that we can have you go back and just click on that. So thank you again, Jason, for being here. I appreciate you very, very much.
Thank you, Kim. This was an honor and a privilege.
And to all you listeners, please make sure you nourish your entire life and give yourself grace today. I really appreciate you being here. If you resonated with this podcast, it would mean a lot to me if you'd be willing to follow or subscribe to the Emotional Eats podcast. Then you'll never miss an episode. Just go to the Emotional Eats show page on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts and tap the plus sign in the upper right-hand corner and click on it. While you're there, if you'd be willing to give me a 5-star rating and review, I would be so grateful. If you'd like to take a screenshot and share it on Instagram, just tag me at Kim Hines Health. I would love to hear your thoughts and let me know how I can support you. You can always DM me on Instagram, again, at Kim Hines Health. And just remember to nourish your life and give yourself grace today.